Hello and welcome to Views of the News. I'm Amy Simons, and with me are Missouri School of Journalism colleagues Mike McKean and Earnest Perry. The militant jihadist group ISIS released video of the beheading of journalist James Foley in retaliation, it says, for the U.S. airstrikes in Iraq. Foley went missing on Thanksgiving Day 2012 in Syria. We're not going to show the video, but we can tell you in it Foley is kneeling against a desert landscape wearing what looks like an orange prison jumpsuit. Beside him, a masked ISIS fighter with a knife. YouTube has pulled the clip, and there has been a threat to assassinate another journalist that ISIS is holding if the airstrikes don't stop. This is a really big deal when this happens. Help put that into perspective for our audience.
Well, I think what our audience needs to understand is that war is definitely different now than it's been in the past. And journalists, not that journalists have not been casualties in wars, but in this one, they're not just casualties. They are actually used as pawns. And what has happened pretty much since the United States went into Iraq is that the journalists who are covering it don't have the protection of a military unit that they can follow. They're going into these guerrilla areas and they're trying to cover it as best they can, and they're having to worry about their own protection. And some of these militant groups are basically capturing them and using them as hostages and trying to get something from the United States or the UN or whatever foe they're actually fighting at that particular time.
Yeah, I mean, we look for some way to explain it, or we look for something to blame something like this on. And, people are talking about whether or not it's our inconsistent foreign policy in Iraq or Syria, whatever. It's the cruelty and the inhumanity of this brand of Islam that the ISIS fighters are following. But I want to point to a journalistic piece that came out actually just a few weeks ago that I think was really prescient when it comes to this story. The New York Times ran an investigative piece back on July 29th where they showed how the U.S. and Great Britain have refused over the past several years to pay ransom when Americans and Brits are kidnapped by Al-Qaeda fighters and affiliated folks. Whereas in Europe, talk about Spain and France and other countries are paying sometimes multi-million-dollar ransoms while denying that they're doing so. And thus you're seeing those folks who are being kidnapped from those countries directly targeted to raise money to help the Islamic fighters to do what they're doing. Whereas because they know the U.S. and Great Britain refuses to pay the ransom, basically if you're kidnapped like James Foley, chances are you've been kidnapped and you're going to die.
And the other thing is that he wasn't really connected to a mainstream or mainline journalism organization. He was working for an online publication. He was doing some things for a French news agency, but he was mainly a freelancer. That puts you even at more exposure when you're out there trying to cover stories like this. Okay, well, you can read more about the topics we talk about on Views of the News by checking out our blog. Find it under the Programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program. Leave us comments or questions and see what we'll be talking about on our next show and more.